5.5 million people and 3.3 million saunas, a country that fought the Soviets, allied with the Nazis, turned on the Nazis, and was never occupied by anyone. One farmer with no scope killed 542 soldiers in 98 days, took an explosive bullet to the face, and lived to 96.
They built the world's biggest phone brand from a paper mill, lost everything, and went from Europe's highest suicide rate to the happiest country on earth.
That is exactly what we are going to break down today. This is History Lens. Finland declared independence from Russia in December 1917 after being passed between empires for centuries, first under Swedish rule for nearly 700 years, then under Russian control for over a century. And when the Russian Empire collapsed during the revolution, Finland saw its only chance and seized it. But freedom did not come with peace, because within weeks the country tore itself apart in a brutal civil war between the Whites and the Reds, and it lasted barely 4 months, but nearly 37,000 people died in a nation of just 3 million, meaning Finland was not born in celebration, but in blood. For 2 decades after that, the country tried to rebuild, but in the autumn of 1939, Joseph Stalin looked at a map and decided Finland was too close to Leningrad, so he demanded territory. And when Finland refused, the Soviet Union invaded on November 30 with over 600,000 troops, thousands of tanks, and total air superiority. Finland had roughly 300,000 soldiers, almost no tanks, and barely any aircraft, and the rest of the world expected the country to fall within weeks. But Stalin's prediction that it would take just 12 days turned out to be one of the worst miscalculations in military history, because Finland held on for 105 days. The reason had everything to do with a concept the Finns call sisu, a word that does not translate neatly into English, but means something close to stubborn, relentless inner strength, the kind of grit that refuses to quit, even when every number says you should. And that spirit defined the entire war. Finnish soldiers knew the terrain better than anyone, and they knew the cold, because temperatures dropped to -40, and while Soviet troops froze inside their trucks and supply lines collapsed, Finnish ski troops moved through the forests like ghosts, appearing from nowhere, striking fast and vanishing before anyone could respond. This is where a farmer named Simo Häyhä became something more than human, because he was a quiet man from Rautjärvi who had spent years hunting in the wilderness, and when the war started, he volunteered and was assigned to the Kola front, one of the most brutal battlegrounds of the entire conflict. Häyhä used a Finnish M28-30 rifle with iron sights only, no telescopic scope, and he refused one because a scope would raise his head profile by a few centimeters, making him visible, and the glass could reflect sunlight and betray his position. So he relied entirely on his own eyes and decades of hunting instinct. He dressed entirely in white, packed snow in front of his firing position so the muzzle blast would not kick up powder, and he put snow in his mouth before every single shot so that his warm breath would not form a visible cloud in the freezing air, which meant he was essentially invisible to anyone looking for him. The Soviets knew someone was killing their men at an impossible rate, so they sent counter-sniper teams to find him, and he killed them. They called in artillery strikes on his suspected positions, and he moved before the shells landed. They deployed entire squads to hunt him down, and none of them ever came back. They named him Belaya Smert, which means the White Death. And according to Finnish military records, he killed 259 enemies with his rifle, and another 250 or more with a submachine gun, bringing his total to roughly 542 kills in under 100 days, which remains the highest confirmed sniper count in the history of warfare. On March 6, 1940, just 1 week before the war ended, a Soviet soldier hit Häyhä in the lower left jaw with an explosive bullet, and the round tore through his face and shattered the bone completely. And when his comrades found him, they assumed he was dead and placed his body on a pile of corpses. Then someone noticed he was still breathing, and he was evacuated and spent days in a coma, and he regained consciousness 11 days later on the exact day the peace treaty was signed.
With half his face destroyed and surgeons forced to rebuild his jaw using bone taken from his own hip. He lived with chronic pain and permanent disfigurement for the rest of his life, but he never once complained, and when a journalist asked him in 2001 whether he felt any remorse for killing so many people, he simply replied, "I did what I was told to do, as well as I could," and he died the following year at the age of 96. Now, here is where the name Molotov cocktail actually comes from, because during the Winter War, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov went on the radio and claimed that Soviet bombers were not dropping bombs on Finnish cities, but were delivering food to the starving Finnish people. The Finns were not starving, and they knew exactly what was falling on them, so they started calling the Soviet cluster bombs Molotov's breadbaskets as a bitter joke. And when Finnish soldiers began filling glass bottles with flammable liquid to throw at Soviet tanks, they called them Molotov cocktails, a drink to go with the food. That is how one of the most famous improvised weapons in history got its name, not from military strategy or engineering, but from Finnish dark humor in the middle of a war they were not supposed to survive, and it is a detail that most people around the world have never heard. But the Winter War was only the first round, because Finland lost significant territory in the peace treaty, including parts of Karelia, and the bitterness ran deep. So when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Finland saw an opportunity to reclaim what it had lost and joined the fight. This was the Continuation War, and Finland fought alongside Germany, not as a formal ally, but as what they carefully called a co-belligerent, a diplomatic distinction that would prove critical later. And Finnish soldiers pushed into Karelia and reclaimed lost ground, but largely refused to advance beyond their original borders. There is one fact about this period that separates Finland from every other nation fighting on Germany's side. Finland was the only country allied with the Nazis that did not hand over its Jewish population. And although around 500 Jewish refugees lived in Finland during the war, only 8 were surrendered, a stain that still haunts the national memory today. By 1944, the tide had turned, and the Soviet Union launched a massive offensive, and it became clear that Germany was losing. So Finland faced a choice that would define its future: go down with Germany or switch sides, and Finland chose survival, signing an armistice with the Soviets in September 1944. One of the conditions was that Finland had to expel every German soldier from its territory, and there were over 200,000 of them stationed in Finnish Lapland, soldiers who had been allies just weeks earlier. And now Finland had to turn its guns on them in what became known as the Lapland War. As the Germans retreated northward, they burned everything behind them in a scorched earth campaign, destroying entire towns and villages. And Finland had now fought the Soviets, fought alongside the Nazis, and then fought against the Nazis. 3 wars and 3 sides in the span of just 5 years. And somehow, after all of that, Finland was the only country bordering the Soviet Union during World War II that was never occupied. Not by the Soviets, not by the Germans, not by anyone, which is a survival record that no other nation in that region can claim. Here is a detail that sounds impossible, but is completely true. During all 3 of these wars, Finnish soldiers built saunas, not after the fighting ended, but during active combat, because a Finnish army field manual from that era states that a battalion of 700 men could build a functioning sauna, heat it, and rotate every soldier through within 8 hours. They built them from whatever they could find, logs and tents and holes dug into the frozen ground, and soldiers who had been fighting in -40 temperatures for days would strip down, sit in a makeshift steam room meters from the front line, and then go right back to war. Because to Finns, the sauna is not a luxury, but a necessity. Finland today has a population of 5.5 million people and an estimated 3.3 million saunas, which means there are more saunas than cars in the entire country. And the Finnish word sauna is one of the only Finnish origin words adopted into virtually every language on Earth. And in 2020, UNESCO recognized Finnish sauna culture as an intangible heritage of humanity. After the wars, Finland faced a completely different kind of survival because the Soviet Union imposed crushing war reparations, and Finland had to walk a razor-thin line between independence and obedience, staying free but never provoking Moscow. And this delicate balancing act became known worldwide as Finlandization. Finland maintained strict neutrality throughout the entire Cold War, never joining NATO, never openly challenging the Soviets, but quietly and relentlessly building itself into something entirely new. And that transformation would produce one of the most unexpected success stories in modern industrial history. In 1865, a mining engineer named Frederick Edestam opened a paper mill on the banks of a river in a small Finnish town called Nokia, and the company produced pulp, then pivoted to rubber and made boots and tires, then moved into cables, then televisions. And then, in the 1990s, it made a mobile phone that changed everything. Within a decade, Nokia was the largest mobile phone manufacturer on the planet, controlling 41% of the global market by 2007, and a tiny country of 5 million people recovering from war and Cold War isolation had somehow produced the most recognizable technology brand in the world, with a ringtone that became the most played melody in human history. Then Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, and Nokia's leadership dismissed it, believing people wanted physical buttons and battery life rather than touchscreens. And by 2013, Nokia's phone division was sold to Microsoft for a fraction of what it had been worth. A collapse so severe that Finland's national GDP actually dipped because of one company's failure. But Nokia did not die because it pivoted to telecommunications infrastructure and is now one of the world's leading providers of 5G networks, meaning a paper mill from 1865 became the world's biggest phone brand, lost everything, and reinvented itself again, which is perhaps the most Finnish story ever told. Now here's the part that seems impossible to believe. In 1990, Finland had one of the highest suicide rates in the world, with over 30 deaths per 100,000 citizens, compared to a European average of about 10, driven by the darkness, the isolation, the cultural emphasis on silence and stoicism, and the lingering trauma of decades of war. The Finnish government responded by launching one of the first national suicide prevention programs in the world, investing heavily in mental health services, training doctors and teachers to recognize warning signs, restricting access to firearms and poisons, and introducing new antidepressants with fewer side effects across the entire healthcare system. By 2023, the male suicide rate had dropped 61% from its 1990 peak. The overall rate was cut in half. And in 2018, the United Nations World Happiness Report ranked Finland the happiest country on Earth, a title it has held every single year since, making it one of the most dramatic national transformations in modern history. The same country that once led Europe in despair now leads the entire world in happiness. And that shift happened not by accident, but through decades of deliberate policy, investment, and the same stubborn refusal to accept defeat that defined every chapter of Finnish history before it. And then came 2022, when everything changed again, because for 80 years Finland had maintained strict military neutrality as the absolute cornerstone of its foreign policy, the one rule that could never be broken. Do not provoke Russia, do not join NATO. Do not give Moscow a reason to look your way. When Vladimir Putin ordered the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Finnish public opinion shifted almost overnight, because before the invasion, more than half of Finns opposed NATO membership, but within weeks, over 76% supported it. And the government moved faster than anyone expected. Finland applied to join NATO on May 18, 2022, and became the 31st member on April 4, 2023, more than doubling the length of NATO's border with Russia in a single day, ending 80 years of neutrality in a matter of weeks, and sending a message that echoed all the way back to the Winter War. We are not afraid of you. There is a Finnish word that explains all of this, every war, every reinvention, every impossible comeback, and that word is sisu. And if you understand what sisu means, you understand why a country of 5.5 million people in one of the coldest, darkest corners of Europe has refused to break for over 100 years. Thank you for watching. This has been History Lens. If you want to discover more stories like this, ones they never put in history books, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.